Good morning, and thank you very much for the introduction. I think you said something good about me in French. And then shalom to everybody. I come from Israel, and I chose to speak to you today about some aspects of my experience as a teacher of social work and psychotherapy over the last 20 years. This is also a topic I teach at university, and I think it's appropriate to the theme of the conference, which is about love and life. So I want to talk with you a little bit about love transference, which of course in 15 minutes you cannot do justice to such a big topic, maybe the most important topic in psychoanalysis. But I want to share with you some of my experience of teaching that subject and a model that I constructed which helps me to understand the various aspects of the concept and how to transfer it to students. So, I want to begin by a very general statement which you are probably all aware of, Freud's revolution. I think the main thing that Freud contributes to our practice and culture is the idea that we are only partially in control of what we do. Who we are is basically unconscious creatures, and we act upon impulses and impressions imprinted in us by our earliest experiences. And this is a great problem because the most important experiences of our lives we don't remember. They happen to us according to our theory, psychoanalytic theories. They happen to us until the age of 3, 4, 5 maybe. But I think if I ask you who remembers anything from that age, probably none of you will. But according to Freud, this is what shapes us. This is what makes us who we are. And we grow up to be adults and form relationships and choose professions and start to lead a life. And then we find we have various issues in our lives. We cannot fulfill who we are. We cannot do what we want easily. We have pain. We have sorrow. We have depression. Depression being the most difficult problem of the 21st century. And psychoanalytic psychotherapy allows us, by creating a space where these earliest impressions are being acted out, psychoanalytic therapy enables us to try to work out the issues which we have with love and to try to untangle all those things that had happened to us at those early ages. So one of my basic assumptions is that in every relationship, every early relationship, we have love, but we also have hatred. In order for the baby to separate from his mother and father, he needs to be loved, but he needs to be hated, almost as much. Not at the same time, depending on how old he is, but he needs to be loved and hated. So this is what's supposed to be happening in therapy. Therapy is about reenactment and reliving very early experiences. So in a good enough therapy, we love and hate our patients, our clients. And if everything goes well, that love and that hatred that doesn't get spoken about too much, it just is. In the same sense that the parent doesn't need the child to tell him all the time that he loves him, just needs to be loving toward the child, and at the same time needs to be hateful toward the child in a sense of being able to say no to the child. But when things don't go well enough, when the therapy gets stuck, when the patient or the client seems to be unable or unwilling to express themselves and to share emotions, associations they deal with the therapist, we say we reach a point of impasse. The therapy process is stuck. The patient is no longer interested in telling the therapist about their life. They actually want to live their life inside the therapy. They start thinking about the therapist as a person who is real in their lives, with whom they can actually find new love. So if the process is stuck and love stops being just symbolic, if love is seeking itself to be actualized in real terms with the therapist, I suggest that this is something that is happening, which is to do with the earliest experiences of the child, which are being acted out in the therapy room. And this is what love transference is. So love is always there in the therapy. Mostly it goes unnoticed and unspoken about. When things go wrong, when the balance between the expression of love and the expression of hatred are disturbed for some reason, usually because of what the patient brings into the room, but quite often also because of what the therapist brings into this room, then we have an impasse. The patient does not share emotions, association, or he stops coming, he stops wanting to pay, he wants more sessions, he wants to meet the therapist in inappropriate situations, he wants to know too much about the therapist that is actually necessary for the process. And I'm sure you're all aware and have experienced such instances where it feels that something is not going well. So what do we do at this situation of impasse? And this is the model I devised, where I suggest there are at least three ways of thinking theoretically about what happens. Each model is around a theoretician, but not necessarily so. But I would say there are three models. The picture here is from a very good film that actually shows one of the earliest examples of what happens when love goes wrong in a therapy room, when love in the therapy becomes an abuse in a therapy. So the first model is a drive model, which is associated with Freud and Freudian thought. And in this model, we think of the therapist as a neutral target for projections and identifications. And when the patient expresses love or too much love towards the therapist is supposed to remain neutral. He's supposed to work out his own feelings of countertransference in his own private time or in supervision or in his own therapy. And he should just resist the temptation of giving back the love to the patient and maintain the boundaries and work out why does the patient is requiring him and putting force upon him to act out his inner fantasies. And also the therapist in this formulation needs to resist to think that the patient falls in love with him because he, the therapist, is such a wonderful figure. In this model, we should avoid the temptation of transference love, in a transference cure, and not think that it is only our personality, our lovely personality, which made the patient better. It is not. In this model, something is going on which needs to be worked out, needs to be overcome. So in this sense, love transference in this model is an obstacle. It is something that needs to be worked out, needs to be thought of as resistance to the process. The therapist remains withdrawn, listens to the patient's talk and interpretations, and interprets back what he does. The second model sees the patient as a child trapped in an adult body. Even though the patient is an adult, he is in therapy, in fact, a child seeking to cure himself of lack or abuse that he suffered in his parental care when he was young. And what he seeks from the therapist when he falls in love with the therapist is for the therapist to be a parental figure, to love him in the way a parent loves a child, not in the way an adult loves another adult. So in this model, the authority of the therapist diminishes in a sense, and the therapist allows himself to express more love openly towards the patient, but it is parental love. Mature sexuality does not exist in that sense, because it is not two adults loving one another, it is the child needing the love of the adult. So the therapist's role is to respond to the infantile needs of the patient, actually respond to them physically if necessary, so hugging, for instance, or covering the patient with a blanket, or even feeding the patient, or caressing the patient, can be thought of as permissible. Because what we need to do is to allow the patient to grow up. We support him with our parental capacities. The third model, which is perhaps the most modern model, is the intersubjective model, where therapy is thought of as an interaction between two consenting, mature adults. So, it is not unlike normal, ordinary social interaction. So in this model, if a patient falls in love with a therapist, the therapist can allow himself or herself to think that it is real love. And the therapist can allow themselves to say to the patient, yes, I also love you. But in this model still, the boundaries are very strict. It doesn't mean that the therapist will allow themselves to form a sexual relationship with the patient, but the therapist will allow themselves to explore up to a point, which is quite a dodgy point, but up to a point how much he can express or she can express the real, mature sexual love towards the patient, still relying on the basic premise that what is going on is a reenactment of early, repressed, infantile wishes. So in this area, I suggest, and I hope nobody is going to get angry with me, I suggest that most abuse of the therapeutic boundaries happened when therapists allow themselves to get very, very near the boundary of what is permissible and what is not permissible. So this is what I've been telling my students over the last 10 years about love transference. And I've been teaching a variety of populations, BA, MA, and postgraduate students. And the response I get from students really range from relief to disbelief. Quite often people say, I'm so glad we are talking about this. You're the only person, the only teacher who is openly discussing what goes on in the room, about the way love can be used and abused. And they bring up their own experiences, they start recollecting times in their own personal therapies or when they were in a therapeutic position, and are able to work out a lot of guilt, a lot of misconceptions they have about what had been happening to them, and they feel good about being able to openly discuss their experiences. Other responses are of disbelief and denial. And usually there are very angry responses saying anyone who practices love within the therapeutic process is abusing the boundaries, and this should not be happening. In Israel, sometimes you can see that boundaries between the two reactions also having a cultural bias. I would suggest that the more conservative religious aspects of Israeli society would respond with more disbelief and fear of giving fuller expression and contact with the love aspect of therapy than others. So to round up, just one point about the patient. I also suggest that there are patients who are more liable to be sexually abused in therapy than others. These are patients who've had abuse in their lives. So I end up usually my sessions, and I will today, with recommendations to therapists which are here. It's very important to have supervision. It's very important to have a rich and personal life. It's important to talk about your work, not keep it within your own boundaries, to share, to write about your experience, to continue studying, to come to conferences like this and meet colleagues. And thank you. I thank you for your attention.